We are recording. It's Nic Harcourt here for 88.5, our Here at Home interview series. And I'm very happy today because I'm a fan of these guys to welcome three of the original Gang of Four for this conversation. We're going to talk about a fantastic new box set. But I should first of all introduce everybody. We've got Dave Allen, who was the bass player in the band, Hugo Burnham, who's a drummer, and we've got the vocalist, Jon King, Andy Gill, who's the guitarist, unfortunately passed away about a year or so ago. And I want to talk about Andy as we get into this conversation as well. But first up, it is a real pleasure to have the three of you sitting on my computer screen this afternoon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dave is in Portland. Hugo is just north of Boston in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And Jon, I'm guessing you're in London.
That's right.
So 1977. I know I was 19. How old were you guys?
21.
I was 22.
I'm going to say you're pleading the fifth a little early in this interview.
No, I was just trying to remember.
I think we were all in a similar age group, right?
Yeah.
I'm the youngest of the four of us. Jon is the oldest. Then it was Dave, and then Andy, and
Andy was a year younger than me. Yeah.
So I was born in 1955.
You all were, except me.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh,
right.
So that's what I mean. It's like it's sort of all sort of like got together somehow.
We're of an age.
So I was born in 57, so I'm 1920 in 1977. And I just remember it being such a bleak time, such a very bleak time in the UK. Mm-hmm. You guys met at university in Leeds. And I remember going up to Leeds around about that time as well. I had a pal who was at the Polytechnic there. And, I came from Birmingham, which I thought was bad, but Leeds at the time was, not a particularly pretty place. Tell us a little bit about that time and how the band got together. I know that Hugo, you were booking bands. How did it all start?
Well, we were at Leeds University. Three of us were actually from the same, very similar, close place in Kent, in the southeast of London. Went up there to study and met there. Jon and Andrew had known each other since they were teenagers at school. And I didn't meet them until we got up there. Leeds was bleak, but it was also beautiful. I mean, gorgeous city, but faded glory. A lot of places were being torn down, old buildings. The university was just the other side of the motorway from the Polytechnic, which you said you were visiting a friend at. The Poly was quite a hotbed of creativity as well. So Dave had come down from Kendal, the Lake District, right, Dave?
Mm-hmm. And then I met you.
Yeah, and then you met me first.
Because you'd put up a thing in...
I had put up a notice in the student union, fast rhythm and blues player wanted, bass player.
Yeah.
Which was sort of code, really, for punk rock.
I worked it out.
Not even punk rock, but Dr. Feelgood type music. So, he got it, and in he came.
I was going to ask you about the music that you were each individually listening to at the time. I know Dr. Feelgood's a reference. Jon, what were you listening to?
Who, me?
Well, you obviously just referenced Dr. Feelgood, but when Andy and I used to love reggae music. One of the most played sets of records I had was a box set of the Trojan Story.
Yeah.
And I played that to death. I also had another much loved box set, which was the Motown Story.
I've still got
the Motown Story had the tracks, and in between little audio snippets. There's a great bit where Marvin Gaye is introducing a song that he sang with Tammy Terrell, who died of cancer when she was like 21, I think.
Yeah, very young.
I remember there was this line I used to play. It seemed very poignant to me. I liked working with her, and she was a great singer. Yeah. And then he goes, in a long pause, and he says, "Besides, she was very pretty." And it was so Motown, funk, of course, James Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the white rock side, of course, every band says it of our type, Velvet Underground. And I like Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
And so Led Zeppelin 1 was, that kind of white rock interpretation of blues music. And, I suppose in this long list, the electric Chicago blues, Muddy Waters and the like. So,
right.
And those British bands were blues, but like Hugo and I, when we first really bonded about music, it was over Free. And with Dave, it was the Meters. Because Dave, you were a mad guy. I mean, City Strike is one of the masterpieces of modern music, isn't it?
I'm trying to get a word in here. Hang on.
Come in, Dave. Talk about the funky meters.
Yeah, I learned to play, like the meters. I had their albums and would sit in my apartment in Kendall and learn how to sort of get it to be funky, as it were. And then, as John says, the same thing for me with reggae, because I used to listen to John Peel a lot, and he would, he was great, and there was tons of reggae he would play, which I'd never really heard before. And so, again, because of the, where the bass lines fit in, like with reggae, it stops, and that's what entertainment sounds like. It's got this breaks in it,
It's funny, John mentioning both Trojan and, because there were those great, he said the box sets, but there was Tighten Up, volumes 1 through whatever, which was the Trojan best ofs. Yeah. My favorite was Tighten Up Volume 2. And then there was the Motown Chartbusters. Again, Volume 2, the one with the big silver sun cover. That was the other one that I had as well. So,
what was the album with the gorilla on the front?
That was Trojan. That was almost dub style.
Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah.
It's interesting that dub music at the time was being, I guess, discovered or rediscovered by a lot of the young bands that were coming out of the punk movement. Hugo, you mentioned Dr. Feelgood. What else was in your playlist at the time?
Credence Clearwater Revival, which I know wasn't terribly hit, but it was the first band I saw live at the Albert Hall back in '71. And that was the band whose records I used to play along to when I got my first drum kit. So they were big for me. But yeah, Stones.
Sure.
Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin 3 was the first album I and quite a few of my friends bought from Virgin Records, which is this new, you didn't have to go to a record store. You'd send away for it. There was a big full-page ad in the back of the Melody Maker and the NME. And everyone at school was saying, it's not going to be real. You're not going to get the turning wheel in Led Zeppelin 3.
Right.
So it was little things like that you remember. But yeah.
I forgot to mention, of course, the rock god Jimi Hendrix. And Andy and I, when we were teenagers, we adored Jimmy and endlessly played Electric Ladyland. And he, on the day that Jimmy died, he went to school with a black armband on. So it was kind of a mixture of Wilco Johnson and Jimi Hendrix was Andy's guitar style. So if he'd been here, he would have said Jimi Hendrix.
Well, thanks for saying that. We're making sure he's here by referencing that, and obviously during the conversation we'll talk a little bit more about him. But let's talk about those early days, the rehearsals, coming together and writing material. What did you guys want to do? What did you want to say?
Well, I always think we had the most immense good fortune by being ignored for a couple of years. When we started off, we wrote quite formulaic songs, more like the bands more like Dr. Feelgood, to be honest. It was verse, bridge, chorus, key change, out kind of things. And they tended to be really fast R&B, a few covers in there. We used to cover Day Tripper and Sweet Jane at the beginning. And so the beginning of being in a band is the thrill of it all. and working out how to be in a band, how to be on a stage. But after a while, and it took us a while, you ask the great question, why am I in a band? As opposed to how can I be in a band, or what's the mechanic of being in a band? And I think it came to all four of us at the same point. Things had sort of fallen together, and we were able to start thinking about that. And I think the breakthrough was when we wrote Anthrax. And that was quite an abstract idea. It was written down. The idea was written down on a bit of paper. It was when Andy and I used to, before we got the rehearsal room, we used to work on an acoustic guitar and a cassette recorder. And so, of course, you can't play a feedback song on an acoustic guitar. But so let's have slabs of feedback, two voices doing contradictory things, where one is commenting on the room over a really fantastic, groovy drum and bass part. So that's then it was down to, I can hand over to Hugo and Dave. It's down to Hugo and Dave then came out with a fantastically groovy, propulsive part that then you could improv the other bits over. I mean, right. Is that a good description of that, Dave?
Yeah, sorry I left there. I was looking for the album that has the gorilla on the front of it.
Trojan record, yeah.
Trojan Records, yeah.
Was it that? No.
Super 8. Was it Super 8?
Yes.
That's the one.
Perfect. So I listened to that a lot.
So yeah, well, I mean, it was just trying to be. It sounded tribal, but that wasn't what it was trying to be. It was just to. What Jon was saying is like, why are we in a band? It's like, let's be interesting rather than just repetitive of other people's ideas.
Yeah.
Just the idea of a drum beat without hitting a cymbal or a hi-hat alone. Yeah. Like, okay, simple.
So Super 8, who was the guy behind that?
I feel like I should be Googling while we're doing this.
Yeah.
Have a look. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was the drive behind that. To not have the standard sort of, as Jon said earlier, verse, chorus. It was a bit more interesting to get away from it.
I think, again, just, obviously, I've thought about how it was that we came to develop our own sound. But I think what we did was that we applied some of the...
Super 8 is a studio album by the Upsetters.
Oh, the Upsetters. Oh, yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
King Tubby.
Huh?
King Tubby meets the Upsetter, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I think what loving funk and loving funkadelic and loving jam songs and loving the meets and stuff, I think what we did without, I think, ever having a conversation about it was apply the funk aesthetic to rock music. Because you listen to, like, say, it's an entirely banal thing to say, but listen to One Nation Under a Groove. It goes along, and someone comes in and someone goes out, and some repetitive lines come by. And if you can apply that sort of aesthetic to a loud guitar, propulsive, punky sounding thing, you end up with something different. I mean, years later, people call it like punk funk or whatever, like the Chili Peppers picked elements from us that they riffed on.
Yeah, they borrowed a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it was the aesthetic of funk, but with the kind of guitar attack of Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. What do you think? Is that good? Does it sound persuasive? It's pretty good, isn't it?
I've said but those very words frequently myself. Yeah.
It's interesting, back at the time, of course, the Clash were messing around with dub music as well, and something that you didn't expect from a punk band, I guess. And when punk became post-punk, I'm not really sure. Maybe you would know better than I. But what were those early shows like? I mean, I'm presuming you were scrambling to find gigs.
Yeah, kind of.
They were quite tough because politically everything was very fraught around us, and the music scene itself. Nobody was quite sure where one stood politically. So we often had a lot of National Front, British National Party skinheads coming along who weren't sure whether they were supposed to be dancing or fighting. So there was always a real tension in the air. which was sort of quite exciting, but it was almost expected it would go off at most gigs, whether we were playing or whether we were visiting. It was always that.
You remember the Electric Ballroom, right? In Camden there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there was like the bodyguards were on stage, and then all these skinheads jumped up, and I had to hit one with my bass guitar.
Yeah.
He had a knife in his hand. He had a fucking knife in his hand, and I turned around, and the bouncers have all disappeared.
Yeah. There was quite a lot of violence at the time.
Yeah.
And but it was at the very beginning of this recording. You'd ask what it was like. Britain was an absolute shit show. I mean, there is no comparison, economically and sort of materially to what life is like now to what it was then. We had 1 in 5 adult males was out of work. Even higher proportion of women were out of work. There was during the so-called winter of discontent, there was garbage piled up 4 or 5 meters high in Leicester Square. It was a huge rubbish tip, rats running everywhere. Mm-hmm. Hull was dubbed Stalingrad because they had blockades of the port going in and out of it. There was 18% inflation. There were sort of double-digit interest rates. And Leeds, the centre of Leeds, the very centre of it, had this great oval-shaped building. I think it was called the Quarry Hill Flats, which we, on absolutely zero evidence, believed was where Hitler was going to have his headquarters had he won the war. And it was like a sort of crumbling brutalist attempt to make a Renaissance walled fortress. It had 4 big gates to it. And if you got inside it, it was a rabbit warren of crime and deprivation and anxiety. Of course, it was a great place for students to live. Mm-hmm. And our rehearsal room, in the block set, there's a photo at the beginning of it of us looking sort of miserable and starved outside some building. I don't know, there were acres of Leeds due for demolition.
Yeah.
And so much so, I used to share a flat with Mark White and Andy Corrigan of the Mekons in Leeds. And we were wandering through the slums of Leeds waiting for the tractors to come in. And as we walked along a road, Andy Corrigan was next to me and Mark White on the other side. Corrigan just disappeared. So there were 3 of us, and then there were only 2 of us. And he'd fallen down a hole in the road. And he only was saved because he was up to his armpits down a hole. There was a great, seemingly bottomless hole that he'd fallen down. And that was what Leeds was like.
Yeah, it looked like it'd been bombed overnight.
God.
So with that as a backdrop, for going into the studio to make your first record, tell us about that. Tell us about going into the studio and putting down these songs that you'd obviously road tested, I presume, most of them before you actually went into a studio.
Well, the first time we went into a studio was when we did the Damaged Goods EP.
Yeah.
In not Stockport, where was it?
Somewhere outside.
Just outside Manchester.
And
we were there for 2 nighs when we did that EP. So we'd had that experience. And then when we signed the deal with EMI, the first thing we did was record At Home Is a Tourist, the first single, which we did at the Workhouse on the Old Kent Road in South London, which we chose basically because that's where Ian Dury had done New Boots and Panties, a record we all loved.
Yep.
So we went, it was owned by Manfred Mann. We went in there and did that, and it was successful. So we just said, right, this is where we'll go back to do entertainment, which we went in to do May, John?
Yeah, but it was slightly perverse because the engineer, Manfred Mann's engineer, hated everything that we did. He hated being in the room with us. He hated our music, and he hated us as individuals.
Yeah.
It was...
And he wanted reverb on everything.
Yeah.
He was quite frank about it too. There was no...
He wanted to what?
Yeah. He wanted reverb on everything. And we were
okay.
No, we're not that band, It's like,
no. I mean, there was a point when I think it was to make him even more angry deliberately. he wanted to put this wash of reverb, basically, I think, to camouflage what he saw, this awful row. And so we said, well, we don't want any reverb that comes out of those boxes. We'll make our own reverb. And we rigged up in the toilet of the studio. We dropped an SM58 microphone into the porcelain pan, a bowl of the and then fed in a grot box of the vocal feed. We said we're not going to have vocal reverb on anything except the vocal. So we fed the vocal through a grot box and then picked up the microphone that was dangling just above water level in the pan of the bog. And they said that's the reverb, and that was the reverb. I have to say, it did sound like shit.
What a shock!
But the real benefit of doing it that way was pissing off the engineer.
Yeah, but the thing was, what was really important to us all was, being serious about it. We were very serious about wanting authenticity. We'd gone a long way from being a band, a genre band. We've gone a long way from being an R&B band or playing like other people, and we knew that we wanted it to sound true. And there was an art movement I remember us all talking about. I think they were called Fluxus in Denmark, who were photographers, and they said that photography was a lot of fakery going on. You zoom in on certain bits and you blow things up and you color treat and all this kind of thing. And so there was a movement then to shoot Super 8 films, but you had to have no edits in it. You had to shoot from start to finish without any edits. You had to use the whole of the photo spool, to even showing the sprockets at the side. And that was kind of part of the aesthetic of the band. We thought it's got to be like we played it, and therefore there were no cuts in it. I mean, there were no edits in it, and even were something like Pro Tools or whatever, or Logic around then, that would have not been allowed in the aesthetic of it. It had to be honest, and it led to lots of things,
which made it quite hard to do. Especially, we started with Andrew and John would be in the control room playing, a guide track and singing, while Dave and I were in the room downstairs recording. And we had to get it right from start to finish. There was we're going to put these two parts together. I found it quite stressful.
It was true. Yeah, that's right. It was stressful, and especially when you've got a hostile engineer.
Yeah.
But what was good about that was he never ever volunteered. After a while, he never suggested anything at all. He didn't say, Hugo's kick drum would sound a bit better if we put a bit of compression on it. Or it might be better if you mic the drums up, differently, when many years later I did a lot of sound engineering work myself, I realized how difficult he'd been. How unhelpful he'd been. And that meant that the four of us then had to dig into our own belief and make it. Which is why, of course, it sounded, as EMI said at the end of it, so difficult to deal with. They thought it was a demo. When we presented the tracks, EMI said, "Oh, that's great. When are you going to do the album?"
Nice demos. Thanks.
Yeah.
Obviously, those early recording experiences for everybody are, really about learning, what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And, if you're in with an engineer who's, doesn't like what you're doing, that's got to be difficult. But necessity is the mother of invention, as they say, whether it's hanging a microphone above a toilet or whether it's, learning to do those things for yourself to create the sound that you're looking for. Were you happy with what you got out of that at the time? Obviously, in retrospect, I'm sure as you were going back through things for this box set, everybody thinks, oh, I would have done that differently. But at the time, when you'd finished Entertainment, were you happy with what you'd created?
Yeah, it was interesting because there were other artists in the studio. Annie, what's her name? Annie
from what band?
From the Scottish band.
Annie Lennox?
Eurythmics. Annie Lennox.
Eurythmics, yeah. And then they kept coming in and going, wow, what is this? This is
Was
amazing.
that the Tourists?
Yeah, I think
the Taurus. That's right. Yeah, the precursor to the Eurythmics.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, finishing it was enormously satisfying.
Yeah.
Because we knew that not many other people, engineers or label, other than our A&R guy who completely got it and supported us all the way through, Chris Briggs, we knew we'd made something that was honest to us, that we felt good about. Some years later, one would say, oh, God, yeah, I would have loved to have heard it if we'd have done it this way, or if we'd have recorded it a bit more like we were live, or, wonder what it would have sounded like if Chris Thomas had produced it, which was one person we'd spoken to earlier on about it. But then the longer time goes on, the less I would ever want to hear it done differently.
There's actually what you just said there, Hugo. I remember us talking about Chris Thomas, because Chris had done a fantastic job on the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
But the Sex Pistols music has not aged well. I mean, it's Black Sabbath with contrary lyrics on it. Essentially, it's speeded up Black Sabbath. I like Black Sabbath. I'm not saying it to slag off Ozzy or anything, but that it wasn't. The music itself was not even remotely radical or interesting or difficult. It just had the fantastic words of Holidays in the Sun. But if you took those words off and put the words of Iron Man on it, you wouldn't be in a different universe. And Chris's genius was capturing fat Marshall Stack guitar stuff and fat Led Zeppelin style open mic drums. But at the time, I thought we'd created a masterpiece. Afterwards, as Hugo said, I began to have doubts about it. And my only doubt now, my only thing that I really deeply regret about Entertainment is on the song Glass, I use a metaphor. I had writing rules to myself. I'd say, do not use metaphors, do not use adjectives, do not use, and I'd have banned words. I had a list of words I wouldn't use and I couldn't use. And like that, because it said, I'm so something, I'm as bored as a cat.
I'm so rested, I'm bored as a cat.
I hate that line so much. What do you mean I'm bored as a cat? I think
that's your most Dylan-esque moment, actually, John.
Yeah, and that's my only regret on that album.
So did you guys pretty much produce the first album yourselves with not very much help from an engineer?
Yes, we did. Yeah. We produced it.
To be honest, it was
because it had to be like we wanted. Hugo, sorry.
No, it was predominantly John and Andrew and our manager at the time, Rob Waugh. It was a small control room, so there wasn't a lot of space. When Dave and I had laid down our parts, it was like, okay, but we could have forced ourselves in, but it's like, no, this is going well. Everyone plays their part. Sometimes you're up in the pool level. Sometimes you're back a bit. So absolutely, the three of them really led the production of that record.
Yeah,
I think though that production is a curious word, and all of us, all three of us here, and you, of course, know different flavours of what being a producer means. And of course, sometimes producers are there to be creative sparks. Like say Brian Eno, he's there to pull together a vision a lot of the time, but doesn't have a distinctive sound of his own. Sometimes you've got producers who have an amazing sound, like Nile Rodgers. And you know what one of his records is going to sound like, whatever the act is, before he even steps foot in the studio.
Yeah. And
sometimes in our case, it was, let's keep it true to what it was like before we came in this place. Let's make sure it sounds like the last time we played a great show. Let's make it like that somehow or other.
Yeah. What was the initial reaction to the record? How was it received?
Hugo, do you want to answer that one?
Brilliantly. I mean, we were very, very fortunate, not just in the UK with the press, who initially had, like John said, luckily ignored us for quite a long time. But then Charles Shaw Murray, who became one of our biggest supporters, I remember just recently when I was going through all the boxes of stuff that we had for the box set, found his first review from the Musical Express, and he was very sort of dismissive what we were doing. Not unkindly, but just like, didn't really do anything for him. But by the time Entertainment came out, it was universally adored, even by sounds, who weren't generally predisposed to what we were doing. And luckily, that translated to the States. We first went to the States in the summer, literally 3 or 4 days after we finished recording Entertainment. We were off to the States on a self-financed tour. We did 6 gigs with the Buzzcocks and 20 some on our own. And it was very, very low budget, but I won't say it was low key, but people had only just heard the Damaged Goods EP, but ferociously well received. And that got us a record deal with Warner Brothers. And that came out in the following spring of 1980. And again, just people just fell for it. I mean, I was always a little bit surprised because it wasn't easy listening.
Yeah, and it was strange, really, because we were this we thought in America absolutely unknown band who'd released a modestly selling EP, and there were the gigs became more and more and more full up and more compressed. And we were doing 2 shows a night sometimes, so on at 10 or 11 and on again at 1 or whatever, and then driving on to the next place. So with that kind of thing happening, you end up being quite good. I mean, you just endlessly play. You never have a chance to even think about it. It's just, gig, next gig, next gig. And each time, instead of it becoming a drag, it became like a juggernaut. It was like we got heavier and heavier and louder and fatter until we ended up in the States, the great revelation of we were supporting the Buzzcocks at the Geary Temple. And it was the most nuts show ever, really. I mean, it's like everyone went berserk at this thing. And it was like 110 degrees on stage.
It was insanely hot. Yeah. And with all due respect to the Buzzcocks, who were happening and fabulous live and wonderful people, they really did a lot for us during that sort of 18-month period. But I think we took them out that night.
That's how we broke out anyway. I was harassing that college somewhere outside of Leeds.
Ilkley,
yeah. Said I really want to, get the band opening up for the Buzzcocks. And this guy, whoever's the producer of the show, so he's like, no, you can't do that, But I kept harassing him. And then finally we got there and we played. And then a few days later, I got a telegram from Richard Boone, the Buzzcocks manager, saying, you've got to come on the European tour with us and stop. Yep. It was it's like an old telegram, stop. This stop.
It was quite funny when we turned up there because we just started to build a PA for ourselves. We take our equipment everywhere. And we turned up to Ilkley, and it was the night in Leeds that the Jam were playing, so nobody was anywhere but Leeds that night. And it's like, oh, hello, who are you? Oh, we're the sport band. No, you're not. Yes, we are.
Yeah.
No, you're not. We don't have. No, we got them from. No, yes, we are. No, you're not. Can we be? Oh, okay.
yeah. And he really liked it. He really liked it.
What about touring America? I mean, John, you were referring to the fact that you just kept playing and getting better and better. Obviously, a completely different country. I mean, we almost share the same language, but coming here in 1979. I know, John, you and Andy had been here a couple of years before. You'd come to New York, I think, right as the punk thing was happening, and really saw what was going on with CBGBs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what was it like bringing these songs to America and bringing them to a completely different country?
Well, I think one of you mentioned the trip to America. I mean, in '76, I was in the year above Andy at Leeds. We were both studying fine art, and I'd got a grant to write about Jasper Johns. In the end, I wrote nothing, but it covered the cost of flying to New York. and Andy got a grant to do a photographic study of Gothic architecture in northern France, and so he spent that money.
He went the other way, right?
He spent that money on a cheap flight, and we had the good luck that a friend of mine was a very talented journalist called Mary Harron. She was the daughter of a super famous Canadian comedian, and was a journalist for New York Punk magazine, of which I've got, I think, issues 1 to 10 upstairs, which all they ever published, which has like photo strips of Debbie Harry in a relationship with Joey Ramone, before they were famous, that kind of thing. And she had just broken up with, I think, the drummer of the then unknown Patti Smith group.
JD.
And so we got in to see Bee every night, and which was a dump, of course, but it was full of talented people.
It was a dump.
I think what the American art punk bands did, they need to break America. You had to break Britain first. So there was this symbiosis of this kind of spiky, difficult sort of music. And I think, I always thought this was more of a kind of an American band in a funny sort of way, because all of the primary influences other than Dr. Feelgood and Led Zeppelin came from the US. It didn't surprise me that Hugo and Dave has become Yankees.
Right, you guys have lived here for quite some time now, right?
Yeah.
But touring America.
Well,
It's a long way between shows.
Yeah, it was. Well, we played someone like on that first tour. We played like the Rat Club in Boston.
Yeah.
And I have to say, every time we went, the place was sold out more or less everywhere. There were some empty rooms where there were infill dates, but what always seemed to be the case was that there was always a group of people in every city that had really dug out hot music, just like we all dug out hot music, just like Dave dug out the Meters.
Yeah.
Living in Kendal. I mean,
I know. Yeah.
You weren't playing, Northumberland windpipes, were you?
Well, in Kendal, there's no people of color, so
Yeah. I mean, it was not what there were. We managed to find those people. They came to find the comparison is more like people like Keith Richards, and that when they were getting records sent direct from Chess Records, they made them from the Marshall Chess, to get these records that you couldn't get in the stores in England. So it was like an underground scene, the same thing. And just before us going there, the police had been, literally right before us, Squeeze had done that circuit, because we were all with the same agency, FBI. In fact, Squeeze put sugar in the petrol tank and they dropped it off at the airport for us, which caused the first, it was a Friday afternoon. We were going to play the Hot Club, was our first show in Philadelphia.
Oh yeah.
We broke down, this is in June or July, broke down in the tunnel coming out of Manhattan on a Friday afternoon.
Oh,
somebody had put sugar in our.
Yeah, it was Squeeze, I'm telling you, But anyway, damn. The Hot Club, we got there at 11:30 or almost midnight, and it was too late, but we played for like 20 minutes, and people loved it. They'd stayed for us. I think that was the first time we saw Pylon, wasn't it, John?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Pylon had come up from Georgia, and we had a long relationship with them ever since. But they'd had to play twice running. And as soon as we arrived, we just jumped on and used their back line and managed to get about 5 or 6 songs in before the fire marshal shut the place down, because it was so late and so hot.
Mm-hmm.
So that was everywhere. It was an underground thing. People knew about this new punk rock. It wasn't even being called new wave then. Yeah. It was that early, but they came out to see it. It was extraordinary in every city we went. Like John said, a couple of spare, empty rooms, but that was really the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
So before we jump into talking about this box set, and I know I'm perhaps running a little long on this, but if you just indulge me, let's talk about the next album, Solid Gold. You're talking about obviously the first album getting such great reception in the UK, coming out to the States and touring it. Where were you at when you went into the studio to do Solid Gold?
Well, none of us wanted to repeat ourselves.
Right.
I mean, for good or bad, I think we all felt that we had done something that was it was itself, and it was kind of hard to unpick it. It is an album. It's not a series of tracks. I mean, with the exception of My Metaphor, the songs all meant to reflect on each other. They're all kind of riffs on something or other. So the next one, we were, all of us love funk music, and wanted to make something that's really heavier and more propulsive. We recorded, I can't remember whether we did Solid Gold before we did To Hell With Poverty.
We did.
Yeah. We did. Yeah. So we've got this idea to get something that's really more propulsive and massive sounding, but without it sounding like, and I don't sound like I'm dissing Chris Thomas's thing, but without it sounding like that kind of thing. And
Sure.
And Jimmy Douglas' name came up, and Jimmy Douglas was, a legend. He was the great producer of Slave, and of course Aerosmith and lots of AOR kind of acts. But to us, he was a hard-on funk producer.
Yeah.
And not only that, but we were able to go into Studio 2 of Abbey Road, the legendary studio. We were on the desk that the Beatles albums were recorded, was Dark Side of the Moon was done, and then our shitty record. Except it didn't turn out to be a shitty record. It had tracks on it, like, again, we had a set of rules of what we were doing, and it was very much, I think this is more to do with Dave and Hugo, that album. It's the sound of it was, you didn't mention, Dave, that your love of Can.
Can.
So, like, if you threw into a pot Can and Funkadelic and Slave and all that kind of stuff, and again, the rules, the aesthetic of funk are start and go on and on and on, like Washington Go-Go, and stop when you feel like it. And so what we all want was like, came out, it went with that great ding, bang, bum, 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 that fantastic poppy bass line over Hugo's relentless, sort of like a pre-sampling sample drum beat. And then again, it was thrilling to feel, God, that sounds really modern. I mean, it still sounds fresh.
Yeah,
it does. And it was one of the best songs that we ever played live. That was constantly a real favorite for us and audiences. And that, talking about recording the album, John said, I mean, I enjoyed it a lot more, much less pressure. We'd all got that first thing out of the way, and felt, I mean, we'd been touring like buggers, all the way up to it. So we were very tight and comfortable and solid together. We trusted each other, I think, a lot more by then. And also having Jimmy Douglas, it was like having, I won't say a referee, that's too much, but it was like having an older brother in the room who'd say, okay, we'll do it this way, which was really good. I think it was good for all of us. We all learned a lot from him, but he will be the first thing. He learned something from us as well. So I think being in that room was amazing.
Yeah, it was very, I was really surprised, actually. I was half looking forward to and half not looking forward to someone who was really going to stamp their sound on the band, the extreme, like someone like Mutt Lange, recording chords string by string, and doing vocals first and drums last, some sort of weird way of working and not letting one in the room. But and he and I had these conversations. He said, these schoolboy lyrics, I remember him saying this to me. I said, these aren't schoolboy lyrics. This is Bertolt Brecht. And I even brought in a book of Bertolt Brecht poems to show him. I said, this is a rip-off of Bertolt Brecht, mate. I want anyone else.
I want to talk about the lyrics in a minute, but before we do that, I want to jump back very quickly to Dave and Hugo to talk about, obviously the rhythm section of the band and how you guys evolved as partners in crime into this album. I mean,
I'm going to be right back. I'm just going to grab a glass of water. I'm getting all dry.
Okay. Maybe Hugo, you can start.
What we were able to bring to that, I mean, it just goes on what I just said earlier. We had been playing so much live that, and I mean, any great rhythm section will tell you don't have to look at each other to know what the other person's going to do. and we rehearsed things well. We pushed through, whether it was disagreements or different ideas, and the songs developing. And working with Dave was, I was the luckier of the two in that partnership, because he really could play. He was the real, certainly earlier on, the real musician with a lot of good background in his playing style, but simplified in a way, because he used to do a lot of jazz bunches and things like that growing up. So it was, I don't know, it was very simply easy to play with Dave.
I mean, just observing the two of them together, because it wasn't like, say, with Jimmy. You had Jimmy would have his flights of genius, and Mitch Mitchell and Thingy's role would be to pick up and follow him in almost like jazz kind of way. He'd be doing his thing, and then that would follow. In fact, with us, the rhythm section, Hugo and Dave defined what was possible. It was kind of the other way around. It wasn't it, and you had to have it. And
it was our creative agreement and aesthetic was there aren't really lead players in this band. It's right. 4 notes that work together to create the chord.
Yeah.
On that album, thinking of some songs that I personally think the song I most enjoyed through our entire life career was "He'd Send in the Army," which is the drum and bass parts of that are sensational and very austere. Dave, you come back with your glass of water now, so you can pick this up.
Yeah. I like that. Me yelling into the microphone as well. It's like, the lyrics and then the way I played the bass, and Hugo. Hugo and I gelled really quickly, I think, from the beginning, beginning with the EP and then Entertainment. And, every time we were out doing shows, it was amazing. We just look at each other, basically. You know what I mean?
Talking about that particular song, there's one, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, but there's one in particular of us playing on the Old Grey Whistle Test, doing that song, doing He'd Send in the Army. And I think it's probably one of the best things of us on YouTube, because it was so much about tension and release. Just Andrew's, is he going to hit it or not? Live, again, that was another one that just went on and on, because we went with the song. It was a lot of space, and Jon just relentlessly hitting what ultimately became
the refrigerator.
Well, we went through bits of metal to refrigerators, and then now, most recently, it was what was it?
A microwave, wasn't it?
Microwave. Thank you.
Well, we started with the microwave, and then
I would play the on-beat on the initially, a bit of scaffolding pipe, and then on the microwave, and Andy would play the off-beat.
Yeah.
So we were both trying to put each other off. David and Hugo were then keeping this thing really tight. And it was the discipline of it was it sounded improvised, but it was really
very sort of mathematical the way we would approach it.
Except for when it stopped, and sometimes we'd stop playing. This was for a minute. We'd stop altogether, and so you'd be on the stage, and I was not going to hit the on beat, and so to try and put Andy off. And he would then try and put me off by counting out the time. And then
I'd literally sit there as still as I could, waiting, but counting in my head. And if he came in on the 4, which is where he should have done, it was like, okay, lovely. If he didn't, inevitably he'd just look at me and give me a look. It's like,
We talked about the onstage relationship between the rhythm section, obviously Hugo and Dave. Jon, talk about the onstage relationship with you and Andy. Obviously, you guys had a a lot longer playing together in other incarnations of Gang of Four after this initial period. But at that time, it sounds like you guys were challenging people, challenging each other, I should say.
Yes, but what we also wanted to do was to use the whole, to use the stage properly. And I think all of us having been to hundreds of gigs by other acts, the most boring ones are the shoegazers and the people who just get locked onto the microphone, and you've got to love the music to endure the performance almost, because it's so boring. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to have movement on it, and the sparring, which is a bit like call and response in blues, the sparring between my lead vocal and then Andy's commentary on my lead vocal. Sometimes there would be the dual lead vocals. And so to reflect the music in this search for somehow that authenticity, we'd start running backwards and forwards across the stage. I mean, so there'd be 3 microphones, left, right, and centre, and then we would be swapping microphones the whole time. It was a really difficult thing for our front of house sound engineer to do, because we'd always be moving around the stage really vigorously, and often accidentally or sometimes deliberately running into each other. I mean, quite physical. I mean, it wasn't unusual to be spattered in blood at the end of a show with one thing or another, which is of course great fun. And we knew it looked good. I mean, there's nothing better than having blood on stage, is there? And
well, when you're 25, maybe.
Yeah. And I remember seeing Iggy Pop, cutting himself up with a bottle, and I thought it was fantastic. I loved it. Yeah. And so
I kept handing him a bottle on stage, but he wouldn't do it.
Yeah. So that was the idea, was never give the audience a chance to rest. So they didn't know where you were going to. They couldn't relax. And when it got big in the end, like me, Andy, and Dave, of course, 3 of us would be at the front on each different mic. We'd then all scatter like 9 pins somewhere else. And then sometimes we'd sort of walk towards the audience. And I remember quite a few shows where the audience would actually back away from us because they were sort of like terrified of this sort of these maniacs. But we weren't maniac, but it was like we were determined that every tiny moment of the show was going to be a surprise.
Tell us a little bit about where you were at lyrically for Solid Gold. We started off this conversation talking about 76, 77 and what was going on in the UK. By 1980, we had Margaret Thatcher as the Prime Minister, and things got worse.
Well, it's a curious thing, because things were awful in the 70s under the Labour government, and they were awful in the 80s under a Tory government. But they're awful in a kind of different way. But her awfulness was quite liberating, because we were we then became extremely active in rock against racism. We were the government would bring in very, very reactionary legislation for everything from against abortion to homophobia and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, not homophobia, against the promotion of homosexuality, the laws against that type of thing. And so we were quite often involved in demonstrations of that type, and of course the national rock against racism movements, and which we also were in our personal lives in there. So, but I don't think I ever wrote a song about Margaret Thatcher or any other politician. Actually, it's as I said earlier on jokingly with Jimmy Douglas, talking about that album, Solid Gold, being more like Bertolt Brecht. Well, it wasn't quite true, because it was more, I think that influence was on both the records, trying to say, to write things that are about how you actually live, and how you actually think about yourself and the people around you is really difficult. Not really difficult. It's a challenge not to talk in cliches about anything. And the easiest challenge is to say, we're all great and it's only because of some demonic politician who runs a country. I mean, you've endured 4 years of a demonic presence in the United States. And he's just a figurehead, I mean, he's a figurehead of a mindset of millions and millions of people. So it's the mindset that's really the thing to talk about. I mean, on Solid Gold, there's one of the songs, Cheeseburger, that came out of a pool game. I mean, Andy and I were playing pool with these guys in Barney's Beanery in Hollywood, up from the Tropicana.
Yeah.
And we played a couple of it was Winner Stays On, so Andy and I were really bossing the table because we were quite good at playing pool, because obviously being in a band you haven't got much else to do. And these two guys, were trying to get on the table, and they were paying for the table, and then they wanted to bet money on it. And so the lines in that became a montage. They go, I run the table, high numbers, low numbers, 8-ball break. I move from one place to the next. I hope they keep down the price of gas. And so I was entranced by this rubbish. But it became a song about loneliness. Because they were just, all these guys were boastful losers.
So it's observational, but at the same time, tying it into something a little deeper. And you talk about a particular figurehead in politics, whether it was 40 years ago or just recently. It's always there's something much deeper to be talking about than just whoever that figurehead is at the moment. Let's talk about this box set, and thank you for indulging me in the conversation leading up to it. When did the concept first come together? When did the idea first come together?
It was quite a while ago. In 2018, through a friend of John's, we were introduced to an attorney in Los Angeles who was specializing in helping acts get their copyrights back under the relative new at the time 35-year rule. And a lot of labels were not happy about it, but a lot of acts were either not together or not talking. But we took that opportunity. We were with Warner Brothers for North America, and it had been in the old days a great relationship. There were wonderful people there when we were actually working directly with them, but it had become a different place. We'd been in the black. In other words, we'd recouped our advances. Nobody was losing money anymore. And yet they were still, the deal was not very contemporary. We weren't making enough money. Not that we were making a lot of money, but we were making less than we should have done given what we were selling, etc. Anyway, so we got out of that deal. And John and I and Dave had been talking about, we really need to make something that represents us from these copyrights. Now that we have control of it, we can decide who we want to partner up with, which eventually became Matador Records for North America. And let's do something that is really authentic, going back to the way we made entertainment. But because there had been a collection or two before that weren't they're not as strong. And we want to say, where was the peak of the band? This was all before Andrew passed away. We started working on this. And I would say we really got into the weeds probably around September of 2019, when the idea was really coming together, and we were doing all our digging and research and talking to people. And John was creating the concept of the box itself. And then Dave and I were looking for stuff. We were talking to people, getting stuff. So it took a good year putting together, and there was quite a spoke in the wheel when Andrew passed last February about how we should do it and what we should do. But it's a very, very honest, true, and successful encapsulation of that 77 to 81 period when band was complete and at its peak. And it was Andrew at his greatest.
So when Andy passed, did that stop things for a minute? Did you have to regroup to figure out how to move on? Because you'd obviously talked about it for a while, but you'd only recently begun the actual process. How did you move forward from that?
I think producing something like this has many stages. Initially, the first thing was the overall concept. What was it going to be like? And I'd found this industrial designer in Denmark who was really, really talented to think about how something might be presented. So before before Andy died, the work was really being done on the sort of shape of the thing rather than the sort of words and what might, the essays and things in it. And had some really crackpot ideas which I couldn't actually make work. I mean, I'd been to a Dada exhibition and I'd seen a print magazine that was 7 meters long. And I was thinking initially of making the whole thing to make it longer than that, just to get the world record of an 8 meter long printed thing. But that was very expensive. And then a concertina type thing where it would just all sort of fold out. Right. Again, be one sheet of paper all folded up. And then a pop-up book tried as well. So to turn all the photographs into pop-up things, like the Neiman Marcus Christmas catalogue sometimes has in New York. And you open it up and it's like Hugo and Dave on their drum and bass, and then me and Andy.
Understood, yeah.
But that was really expensive. But then thinking that wasn't really zeitgeisty enough, really, and to make it out of completely recyclable, to make it out of cardboard, to make it look like it felt like at the time. And so that defined, once that happened, Hugo and Dave were just kept coming up with amazing stuff because they know, I don't know anybody, but they were talking to, Michael Stipe and Vanessa from Pylon and Henry Roll. They were all those people, and they were so eager or so keen to contribute. As just receiving an email from Hugo or Dave saying, "Can you give us a memory?" What would have happened, of course, if Andy hadn't been so ill? He was very ill before that happened, of course. He had an autoimmune disease. He had high blood pressure. He had a drink problem. He was overweight. He had all sorts of issues that meant he was struggling. But obviously, I would have, had he not died, I would have thought there would have been more direct words about that thing from him in there, But so we did have to consider that. But the main thing was to make it all about the years when we were at our best. That was 77 to 81. And when Andy's greatest work was in 77 to 81. I mean, and I think it's a fitting tribute, and to him and to the four of us at the time.
So you've collected together a lot of photographs, as you mentioned. I actually haven't seen a physical copy of this, but I was sent a PDF of a lot of the stuff that's in there, and there's some fantastic photographs, and obviously memories from people and reviews and clips from the various music magazines that we've talked about during this conversation, and it looks fabulous, at least on this on this PDF that I have. But what about the music? I mean, obviously you've got Entertainment and Solid Gold remastered, but then there's a singles LP. And I think perhaps most interestingly for me, because I've never heard it, this double album of the Live at the American Indian Center concert you did in 1980. Talk about that concert and why that was one you felt would add something to this.
Because at the time we were so fierce live, and we didn't record a lot of ourselves live. I mean, there are bootlegs all over the place. But this was a really good quality. It had been recorded by a chap called Terry Hammer, who did it for, was it KUSF? It might have been. It was like a live show that they went out while we were playing. And I'd come across him once or twice over the years. People have put us in touch. Oh, yeah, I did that. So I reached out to him because we thought that would be a great thing to share. Make it official.
Did you have it at the time? Had you heard
I'd
the recording?
had it. Yeah, I'd had it from various points.
I had heard it.
Yeah. So go on.
No, I was going to say the other thing was Andy loved and was obsessed with the Plains Indians and the Lakota culture. And he wasn't a great reader, but he used to wander around with a copy of Bury My Heart, Wounded Knee. And at school, I was at school with him from teenage years. I remember him doing a silkscreen print of the great Lakota war leader Sitting Bull. And when we arrived in this venue, I mean, I was thrilled to be there because it was the center of Native American activism in the US at the time. In the early 70s or mid 70s, the Native American movement had occupied Alcatraz in the harbor of San Francisco. It was one of the first moments, where that kind of anger was expressed, and the American Indian Center was at the heart of it. And we walked on stage to do the sound check, and I remember looking up, and there was, in fact, one of the photos has it. There was a picture of the great warrior Sitting Bull, and it said "landlord" underneath it. And that I thought that is a Gang of Four image. I mean, it's an archetypal image of this man, and then a narrative that sort of brings surprise with it. And it was fantastic to be there, and it was rammed with people, wasn't it?
So I'm totally looking forward to hearing that. Obviously, there's also a C90 cassette, which brings back all sorts of memories of being a teenager or a young adult, I guess. With cassettes and C90s, of course, you could just about put an album on each side, depending on unless it was some prog rock album that went on for bloody ever. But you could get
which we all had, admit it.
I know, you'd be recording, damn, I didn't get the last 15 minutes of that album.
I mean, I pushed that one because we had these demos, again, that I'd collected or kept over the years. And another friend from Leeds who is an absolute pack rat, who did actually have in his possession one of the originals from our rehearsal room with quite a lot of them on it. And I thought this would be a nice little piece to include, put it on a cassette, not least because, a lot of the cool kids are doing the cassette thing again. I mean, yeah. And I just thought, okay, great. Something for some people to get annoyed about because they can't play it. Lovely, And we hand wrote it, the original thing on it. Because we had enough to put onto a C120, but then nobody could find anyone to manufacture a C120. So I had to spend a day editing all these demos down in hopefully a way that nobody noticed the cuts. But there was quite a bit of rambling going on, so nobody missed it. Got it down to fit on the two sides. And there were the very early cassettes we'd done, demos, I should say, we'd done in our own rehearsal room in Leeds. Produced, I think, mostly by Andy Corrigan, the Mekon singer. We'd set up our own system with some old stuff in the room. And the others were a couple from demos we did for Polydor in their studios when they were wanting to sign us. And the rest were songs that we'd actually done ready to go to Abbey Road with for Solid Gold. So, I mean, they're fun. And I mean, some people said, oh, well, why didn't you ever record these songs? And if you listen, most of them actually did end up as other songs. So I mean, I think they were important to include because you can say, okay, which one did this become? Yeah. Well, and the Elevator, which EMI really wanted us to record because it was just a straight ahead rocker. That, of course, if EMI wanted it, we say no.
No, I'm glad we didn't. But I was as a side project, thinking of the hunt for authenticity. I wondered. I'd read an article about the people who collect 78 shellac records, which they were still making shellac records until the mid '60s, and so I looked into if we could make the album on a 78, and I did a lot of work on that, and I spoke to some real specialist people about seeing if we could do it on a 78. Again, that foundered because to get all that stuff on, you'd have to have about 24 shellacs, and it would have weighed about sort of 400 pounds. And
weight, not the money, the weight.
The weight, yeah. And then I thought it'd be great to do an album, a vinyl album, but running at 78. So I looked into that because 33 1/3 you get pretty good sound quality. But if you can cut, like we know with 12-inch singles, if you can run, the faster you run it, the better the quality it is. So I found that was also not technically going to run.
They were fun conversations when we were going through the process. And I used to get these little texts from our manager when John would bring some of these ideas up. You just go, oh, God.
But I think that, the essence of it was just that something like that cassette is about authenticity. That's actually how, as you just said, that's how people heard music.
That's what you did. You demoed onto cassettes, and I'm presuming at some point you had like little 4-track Tascams or something. And
I don't think we ever went that way. We were because by the time we were, David moved on to Shriekback, and we were actually working out of a small 8-track in East London. Like we booked it out forever. So the 4-track Tascam thing, we sort of jumped over that one, didn't we?
Right.
Yeah. But it is interesting how the most enduring technology really has been vinyl, and vinyl still absolutely sounds better than CDs. It hasn't got any aliasing in it. It hasn't got processing in it. Sounds better than DVD. Sounds miles better than any of the streaming media formats, which are compressed to buggery.
Yeah.
And those Solid Gold and Entertainment were mastered at Abbey Road from the original 1/4-inch tape. So, it was a real hunt actually to try and dig those up. It was quite an effort because the workhouse where we recorded the album burnt down in the late 90s, and all the 24 tracks were destroyed. And at one point we weren't sure whether there were any 1/4-inch masters of it. It did actually emerge in the files of Abbey Road.
Oh, so you were fortunate that there were copies in storage?
No, they were the original masters.
Oh, they were the originals?
They were the originals. They had been moved from, luckily, they weren't stored at the workhouse.
Incredibly
because they've been mastered at Abbey Road originally.
Got it. Well, that makes sense. Well, thank goodness that they had them. And I know you've collected, posters, essays, artwork, liner notes. And then the other thing that I saw that I know that you're very particularly proud of, John, is that the lyrics are reproduced correctly.
Yeah. I when we started off, I couldn't really remember all of the lyrics. And I looked online, being lazy, I looked online at some of these sites that sort of, do it, thinking I could just cut and paste them. And I was quite surprised at how bad they are and how wrong they were. And obviously they've been done by some machine editing thing, some bit of software had done it. So I thought for the first time ever, it would be good to have the lyrics approved and authorized as they were written, because they were written with extreme attention to the structure. Many of the songs, as you can see, obviously aren't really written like songs at all. They don't have verses and they don't have choruses. And a lot of the time, the rules I would have when I wrote them was have no rhymes in it at all, which is quite a difficult little challenge, And so it was really important to get that on the page. And so every page has got the approved lyrics, and then it's got an anecdote next to the song, or a memory that relates to that song from someone that we know, or some musician who's been influenced by it, and then a factoid. So as an example, because we get asked a lot about these, on Ether, the final line of Ether is, "There may be oil under rock all," which is a mysterious line that I think we've all been asked endlessly, what on earth is that all about? And so the factoid is that in the 1950s, the last act of British imperialism was to claim a rock about the size of a small house in the middle of the Atlantic called Rockall, covered in guano. They landed 2 Royal Marines on it and then declared it was the property of the British Empire. And because it gave them the ownership of the continental shelf around that rock for the oil.
And all the oil, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's been in dispute ever since. It's still to this day in the international courts between Ireland, Iceland, and Denmark. They all contest the British ownership of this island, which is just covered in bird shit. And having put that in there, they discovered oil actually about 10 years after there may be oil under Rockall with My Suspicious Mind. And so I think, it's a bit like, those forecasts of Nostradamus. I think if you look carefully at the
Jon King
lyrics,
Nostradamus.
Yeah, if you look at the lyrics, that it did predict the great COVID pandemic.
You knew what was coming. You saw it all.
It's all in there. You just have to dig.
I'm waiting for "To Hell with Poverty" to become real.
Oh, well, while we're talking about "To Hell with Poverty," I do just have to say, as a fan, if you can look around my wrist here.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's my and that's actually the typeset from the single as well, I think.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Wow. Well, I think we should send our publisher around to your house. So John's saying about the authentic lyrics, and we got a note from Grill Marcus, who Grill is, about it, because we sent it to him, and he said, Grill knows Gang of Four longer and better than almost any other writer around, and he says, well, of course, I found mishearings. I always thought it was, "I do love a new purchase," which is what I'd thought for years as well. I ideal love a new purchase. But it's like, oh, thanks, Grill. I wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
So
that, the authenticity is the core of it.
So at the end of this process, obviously you have this this fabulous looking limited edition box set, which is collecting all those those 2 albums and the other early work. We talked a little bit about the packaging as well, and I know, before I let you go, the aesthetics of Gang of Four was reflected in the artwork, was reflected in how you presented everything. So how do you feel about how you've got this all together now into this package? I know that, John, you've done a lot of work on this, and you said you engaged a Danish who worked on it with you?
Well, I worked with this guy called Bjarke, and
right.
He is an industrial designer on the box bit of it. So that was the
right.
So you got a book, and it's an American A4 size book with 100 pages in it, and that thickness defined the other half size of the box set. So you're working on that basis, and we had to work out how to make a slot that could fit the cassette. And having done that in a way that could possibly be manufactured, then worked with a guy called Dan Calderwood in the UK, who's a fantastic, runs his own company, graphic designer. He does, for example, the boxes of the Game of Thrones, things like that. And he is a big fan, and he just. I was talking to him actually this morning, because we're working on finishing off the CD. There's going to be a CD edition, not.
That was my next question, actually, but yeah.
Yeah, and the point of the aesthetic of the book was to to give a flavour of what it was like to be doing that thing at that time. So it was quite scrapbooky, and there were trompe l'oeil effects in there, and the bits like Hugo's drumsticks on the page. There's one spread, and every page would be really hard working, but there's a photograph that was taken by the US Department of Defense of the Great Rally in Madison Square Gardens in 1939, of 20,000 uniformed swastikaed America Firsters.
Yep.
With this huge portrait of George Washington, who they claimed was the first fascist, with swastika flags and American flags. It's a travesty of American democracy. But Hugo sticks with these sticks fight fascists, which of course is Hugo's take, Woody Guthrie. He had actually hit on his guitar, said, "This machine kills fascists" on his guitar. But so it was trying to say this, whatever it was we did, there's relevance to what's happening right now, and I salute any musician who's going to work in, say, the Black Lives Matter thing in a way that we thought was important to do when we were doing Rock Against Racism. These struggles continue, and music and culture is at the heart of it.
So Dave, let me just ask each of you to wrap this up. The process of doing this and looking back, not just at the music, but as who you guys were, who we change and we evolve, hopefully. Looking back at the man you were, the musician you were back then, what's that been like? And I'll start with Dave and maybe work our way through it.
I'm not quite getting the question. What?
Well, looking back in time, remembering the time, who you were.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I mean, I turned up in Leeds. Like we said, Hugo and I were talking. I met Hugo, and then it somehow worked out really well. And so, looking back right now, it just seems to be, it was like 40 years, right? It's been a long time. And it's always been good. I really, really, really enjoyed the 2005 when we reformed the entire band again.
And you did the Return the Gift album. Now, just very quickly, if I can insert, you re-recorded the songs, right? Was that because of copyright issues and all that?
Yeah, we owned the masters.
Right.
And we could do whatever we want because it was beyond in the contract,
Right.
There's a certain amount of years where after that you can re-record your own masters. So, yeah.
So back then, the original lineup got back together, did the album and toured and festivals and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good one. Everywhere we went was like packed, and festivals and Coachella. It was fun. A lot of fun. It's just a pity we can't get out right now because of the COVID thing and whatever. Right. But it looks like 2022 might be okay, according to Richard. Like I said earlier, before these guys turned up, can we get out to Europe and do all the festivals? Hopefully back in the Pixies, because that's his other band, his big band. So, yeah, But other than that, it's like 2020 was like lockdown. 2021 is still locked down here. Just got to get out and about and get back to playing.
Absolutely, go somewhere, anywhere at this point.
Yeah, and I'm sure we all want to do that, right, guys?
Hugo, what was the trip down memory lane like for you?
I think what's been really good about it is, certainly for this past year, the three of us working closely together to do something to celebrate and not rehash, but reinvestigate what we were doing and how we were doing it. And over the 40 plus years, I think what's a real strength as a team is what we've done separately over the years. We've all done different things, mostly indirectly related to what we were doing with Gang of Four. I think Jon's probably the one who's moved away furthest during his other career from it, but everything was down to how we started as a team. It was, as Dave said, it was great, really refreshing and really encouraging when we came back together for the first year or so of the reunion in 2005. But doing it again now as old men, relatively old men.
Older.
We're very lucky to still have this relationship and still be doing creative stuff together. Absolutely.
Jon, maybe I can get you to wrap it up for us.
I think that for me, the overwhelming feeling was two things, really. One was emotionally, when you see the PDF and you look at the book, the photographs of the four of us, we were a really tight crew. We really were great friends. We all loved each other. We all entertained each other. The overwhelming quality of the photographs from brilliant photographers is one or others is always smiling and enjoying each other's company, you know, and it's often nearly always the case in bands that you sort of fall out and you end up being unkind to each other and all that kind of stuff. But remembering it there, that was a time then when we were brothers. So that was I found it very cathartic, and again, in the light of Andy's death, it was nice to go back to a time when, you know, we were absolutely, our lives were totally interwoven and positive. Then on the intellectual side, or the creative side rather, is to have done something that has, that I'm really proud of. You know, it's a remarkable blessing to have been able to work, in my case, with three other amazing musicians who made me look good. Mm-hmm. and hopefully we all made each other look good. And so those are my big takeaway. And this has been, as we say in the book, a labour of love. And I think that's why it's a limited edition. Anyone who buys this has got to love it. I mean, this isn't for everybody. This is just for aficionados.
Well, and you were a Gang of Four. I mean, that's who you were at the beginning. I can't let you go without asking one final question, because we talked about maybe going out on tour in 2022. You're going to have to find someone to play guitar, obviously. Have you begun that process? I hadn't
thought of that. Oh, no.
That is certainly something that will exercise our thinking. If we do that, which I think we'd all be really positive about, we will really do that, because it will be something that needs to be really respectful, but different and original.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure as a fan and as somebody who's made my living in this business playing music by people I like. Case in point, Gang of Four. I have your lyrics tattooed on my wrist for some strange reason. But thank you so much for taking the time to just talk about what it was like making those early records, those early shows, and then looking back 40 years later and making a definitive collection of what it was like. So it's great talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick. Real pleasure.
Yeah. Good night.
88.5 FM, KCSN, and KCSN HD1 Northridge, Los Angeles. KSBR and KSBR HD1 Mission Viejo. A service of California State University Northridge and Saddleback College. Member-supported public radio. Streaming on the web at 885fm.org.